The rain hammered down in relentless sheets as Ben pulled his old hatchback into the gas station lot. The windshield wipers groaned with each swipe, barely keeping up with the storm. In the backseat, his 6-year-old son Timmy was unusually quiet, absorbed in a dog-eared book about dinosaurs. Ben turned off the engine, his stomach growling faintly as he glanced toward the flickering neon sign above the station. It wasn't the kind of night anyone wanted to be out, but they had little choice. Gas was low, and he needed directions or at least an idea of where to find somewhere cheap to eat. As he reached for his hood, movement at the far edge of the lot caught his eye. An elderly woman stood there, drenched and clutching a large leather handbag to her chest. She turned her head slowly, her frail figure almost swallowed by the downpour. Her thin blue coat was soaked through, clinging to her small frame, but she didn't seem to notice. The way she scanned her surroundings, her confusion palpable even from a distance, sent a pang through Ben. "Stay here," Timmy, Ben said, pulling up his hood and glancing at his son. Timmy looked up, his brow furrowing. "Where are you going, Dad?" Ben forced a reassuring smile. "Just to check on someone. Lock the doors, okay?" Timmy nodded and leaned over to press the lock button. "Okay," he said, his eyes following Ben as he stepped into the storm. The rain hit Ben hard, icy and relentless, but he pushed through it. He jogged toward the woman, slowing his pace as he got closer. Up close, she looked even more frail, her hair plastered to her head, and her hands trembling against the bag she clutched like a lifeline. "Excuse me, Ma," Ben called gently, stopping a few feet away. "Are you okay?" The woman turned to him, her watery gray eyes widening with a mix of relief and hesitation. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling. "I was trying to get home, but it's gone. I don't remember." Ben frowned, keeping his tone soft. "Do you know your address? Or maybe a phone number I can call for you?" Her expression shifted, and for a brief moment, something like recognition crossed her face. "I wrote it down," she said, her voice unsteady. "It's in my bag. I know it is." "Do you mind if I help you look?" Ben asked, motioning to her bag. The woman hesitated, her grip on the bag tightening before nodding. "Yes, please. That would be kind of you." Ben gestured toward his car. "Let's get out of the rain first. My son's waiting over there, and we can figure this out where it's warm." Her hesitation lingered, but she eventually nodded again. "All right," she said softly. Ben held out a hand, not to take the bag but to steady her if she needed it. She didn't take it, but her steps toward the car were small and uncertain. Ben opened the passenger side door and helped her inside, shielding her as best as he could from the rain. "Timmy," Ben said as he climbed into the driver's seat, "this is." He paused, looking at the woman. "What's your name, Ma?" "Evelyn," she said, her voice faint as she settled into the seat, her hands still gripping her bag tightly. "This is Evelyn," Ben said, turning to Timmy. "She needs a little help getting home." "Hi, Evelyn," Timmy said, his grin shy but bright. "Hello, young man," Evelyn said, her voice softening just slightly. "That's a nice book you have there. Dinosaurs, is it?" Timmy's eyes lit up. "Yeah, they're my favorite. The T-Rex is the best one, it's super strong." Ben smiled as Evelyn nodded at Timmy, a hint of warmth returning to her expression despite her soaked appearance. Turning back to the front, he started the car, blowing warm air through the vents. "Let's see what we can find," he said, motioning to her bag. "May I?" "Yes," she said, loosening her grip and placing the bag in her lap. Ben sifted carefully through the contents: tissues, a folded scarf, an old flip phone that wouldn't turn on, and loose receipts. Tucked into a side pocket, he finally found a crumpled piece of paper. "Here we go," he said, holding it up. Scrawled on it in shaky handwriting were a phone number and an address. Evelyn leaned closer, her face lighting up with relief. "That's it. Oh, thank goodness." Ben glanced at the address and frowned. It wasn't familiar to him, but it looked like it was in a nicer part of town. He set the paper on the dashboard, knowing his dead phone wouldn't help him confirm the location. "It's okay," he said, glancing at Evelyn. "I'll drive you there. It's not safe for you to be out here like this." "Oh, I couldn't ask you to do that," Evelyn said, though her tone was uncertain. "You're not asking," Ben replied with a small smile. "I'm offering." Evelyn hesitated a moment longer before relaxing slightly, her shoulders lowering. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're very kind." Ben checked the rearview mirror, catching Timmy's eager grin. "Ready for an adventure, bud?" "Yeah," Timmy exclaimed, his voice brimming with excitement. Ben chuckled, shifted into drive, and pulled out of the lot. The rain continued to batter the windows, but inside the car, the heater hummed, and for the first time that evening, it felt like they were heading toward something brighter. The heater pushed warm air into the cabin as the rain hammered against the windows, muting the world outside. Evelyn sat quietly in the passenger seat, her bag resting on her lap now, her fingers absently fiddling with the strap. In the back seat, Timmy held his book open, but seemed far more interested in watching Evelyn than reading. "Is that your grandson?" Evelyn asked suddenly, breaking the silence. She glanced back at Timmy with a small, tentative smile. Ben chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Ma am. That's my son, Timmy." "Say hi, bud." "Hi, Evelyn," Timmy said, grinning brightly. Evelyn's smile grew a little warmer. "Hello, Timmy. You like dinosaurs, do you?" "Yeah, the T-Rex is my favorite." "Did you know it could bite as hard as a crocodile, but like 100 times bigger?" Timmy said, his words tumbling over each other. "I didn't know that," Evelyn said, her voice softening. "How fascinating." Ben glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. Her frailty was still evident, but the way her face softened as Timmy chattered made him wonder what she'd been like before the confusion, before whatever had brought her to that gas station in the pouring rain. "Is the address far from here?" Evelyn asked, pulling Ben's attention back to the road. "Not too far," Ben said. "I think it's on the other side of town. It'll take a little time with the rain, but we'll get there." Evelyn nodded, though her expression grew distant again. "I don't know how I ended up there," she murmured. "I was supposed to be home hours ago, but everything got so blurry. I couldn't remember where I was, and then it got dark." Ben kept his tone light as he said, "It happens. Sometimes a place can feel different in the rain, or maybe it was just one of those days." Her hands tightened briefly on the bag. "My mind. It doesn't work the way it used to. I hate worrying them, my family, I mean. They worry so much already." Ben's grip on the wheel tightened slightly. He'd heard those words before, countless times, from his dad when things started slipping away from him. The guilt, the frustration, the quiet resignation, it all felt painfully familiar. "You're not a burden," Ben said after a moment, his voice steady. "Families worry because they care. It's their way of loving you." Evelyn looked at him, her watery gray eyes filled with something between gratitude and doubt. "You're kind to say that. But it doesn't make it easier." Ben nodded, not pressing her further. He let the rhythm of the rain on the roof fill the silence as he focused on the road. They drove through quiet streets, past dimly lit storefronts and neighborhoods where the houses grew bigger and brighter. Evelyn shifted occasionally, her gaze flickering toward the window as if trying to recognize something. Finally, the houses gave way to a more affluent neighborhood. The lawns were neatly trimmed despite the storm, and the driveways were wide and lined with luxury cars. Ben glanced at the crumpled note on the dashboard, and then at the numbers on the mailboxes. "This looks like it," he said, slowing as he pulled into the driveway of a sprawling 2-story home. Its windows glowed warmly in the rain, and the porch lights illuminated the carefully manicured hedges flanking the door. Evelyn leaned forward, her hand clutching the dashboard lightly. "Yes. This is it," she said, her voice filled with both relief and hesitation. Ben turned to her. "Do you want me to come with you? Just to make sure someone's home." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. He climbed out, rounding the car to help her. She accepted his arm this time, her movements tentative but steady as they made their way up the stone steps. The rain had eased to a drizzle, though the air still carried the chill of the storm. Evelyn paused at the door, taking a shaky breath before ringing the bell. The sound echoed faintly inside, followed by hurried footsteps. A moment later, the door swung open, and a woman in her 40s stood there, her expression shifting from alarm to relief. Mom? Oh, thank God, the woman said, pulling Evelyn into a tight embrace. Evelyn returned the hug but looked back at Ben. This young man found me. He brought me home, she said softly. The woman turned to Ben, her eyes glistening with gratitude. Thank you. I've been out of my mind with worry. I'm Amelia, please come inside. Both of you. Ben glanced back at the car. My son's in the car. I should. Oh, bring him in too, Amelia said quickly. He's welcome. It's the least we can do after what you've done. Ben nodded, grateful for her warmth. He waved to Timmy, who hopped out of the car and ran up the steps, his book tucked under his arm. As they stepped inside, Ben couldn't help but marvel at the home. The foyer was grand but inviting, with gleaming hardwood floors and a chandelier that cast a soft glow over the space. Family photos lined the walls, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. Amelia guided her mother to a plush armchair in the living room. Sit, Mom. Let me make you some tea, she said, her voice gentle but firm. She turned back to Ben and Timmy. Please, make yourselves comfortable. I'll be right back. Ben sat on the edge of a couch, his hands resting on his knees as Timmy perched beside him, wide-eyed at the grandeur of the room. This place is huge, Timmy whispered, his voice filled with awe. Ben chuckled quietly. Yeah, bud. It is. Evelyn sat quietly in her chair, her hands no longer trembling as much. She looked at Ben, her eyes softening with gratitude. Thank you, she said again, her voice steadier this time. You didn't have to stop. But you did. Ben nodded, his own voice quiet. It was the right thing to do. The warmth of the house felt like a shield against the storm outside. Timmy sat next to Ben, his small hands tracing the edge of his book as his gaze darted around the room. Despite the grandeur of the space, there was a lived-in quality to it, plush blankets folded on the armchairs, faint smudges on the edges of the photos on the walls. Amelia returned moments later, carrying a tray with a teapot, mismatched mugs, and a small plate of cookies. She set it on the coffee table, her movements brisk but careful. Mom, you should eat something, she said, placing a mug of tea into Evelyn's hands. She then turned to Ben and Timmy, offering them mugs as well. Please help yourselves. It's the least I can do. Timmy's eyes lit up at the sight of the cookies, but he waited for Ben's nod before reaching for one. Thank you, he said politely, his fingers curling around a chocolate chip cookie, as though it were treasure. Amelia smiled at him before sitting down across from Ben. I can't tell you how grateful I am, she said, her voice warm but tired. When I realized she was gone, I panicked. We've been doing everything we can to keep her safe, but it's hard. Some days are better than others, you know. Ben nodded, his hands wrapped around the warm mug. I do. My dad, he had dementia too. I know what it's like to worry, to wonder if you're doing enough. It's not easy. Amelia's face softened. I'm sorry you had to go through that. It's one of those things no one really understands unless they've lived it. She glanced at Evelyn, who was quietly sipping her tea, a faint smile tugging at her lips as she watched Timmy. I noticed the signs, Ben continued. When I saw her out there, it reminded me of my dad. I couldn't just leave her. Amelia's gaze lingered on him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. That says a lot about you. Not everyone would have stopped, let alone gone this far. Ben shrugged, his voice modest. It was the right thing to do. Mark entered the room then, wiping his hands on a towel as he approached. His presence filled the space, not in an imposing way, but with an air of calm authority. "Your mom settled?" he asked, glancing at Amelia. "She's good," Amelia said with a small nod. "Ben here is the one who brought her home." Mark extended a hand to Ben. "Mark. Thanks for stepping in when you did." Ben stood and shook his hand firmly. "Ben. It wasn't a problem. I just happened to be in the right place." Mark chuckled. Most people wouldn't have taken it this far. It's rare to see someone go out of their way for a stranger. Timmy piped up, his cookie halfway to his mouth. "My dad's always helping people. He even fixed Mr. Parsons' car for free once." Ben smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That was a long time ago, bud." "Still counts," Timmy said with a grin. Mark laughed, his broad shoulders shaking slightly. "Sounds like you're raising a good one there," he turned back to Ben. "Amelia mentioned you're a mechanic." "Yeah," Ben said. "I've been working part-time at a small shop. It's steady work, but they've cut hours lately, so it's been a little tough." Mark's eyebrows raised slightly, and he exchanged a glance with Amelia. "Well, I run a few garages in the city. We're always looking for dependable people. If you're interested, I'd be happy to get you started." Ben blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the offer. "You mean a job?" "Yeah," Mark said, smiling. "We need people we can trust, and from what I've seen tonight, you're exactly that kind of person." Ben hesitated, the weight of his responsibilities flickering in his mind. "I don't know what to say." "That's incredibly generous." "It's not generosity," Mark said. "It's a good opportunity for both of us. Think about it, and let me know." Amelia leaned forward, her voice soft. "Ben, you don't have to decide now. Just know the offer's there." Ben nodded slowly, his chest tightening with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As they spoke, Evelyn's voice broke through the conversation. "Amelia," she said, her tone more focused than it had been all evening. "Did you tell him?" Amelia looked at her mother, her lips pressing together briefly before she turned back to Ben. "No, not yet." "Tell me what Ben asked," his brow furrowing slightly. Amelia exhaled, her smile returning. Well, we're comfortable. Financially, I mean. Mom built a successful business years ago, and we've been fortunate ever since. The truth is, we're in a position to help people who deserve it. And you, Ben, you more than deserve it." Before Ben could respond, Amelia left the room and returned moments later with a small envelope. She handed it to him, her expression both kind and resolute. "This is for you and Timmy," she said. "It's not just about what you did tonight, though that's part of it. It's about giving you a little breathing room." Ben stared at the envelope, hesitant. I can't take this." "Please," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "Let us do this for you. It's a thank you, nothing more. And you've earned it." With a deep breath, Ben opened the envelope. The sight of the bills inside a life-changing $10,000 made his chest tighten. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This means more than you could ever know." Amelia smiled. "You've already thanked us. Now just let us help." Ben glanced at Timmy, who was happily munching another cookie, blissfully unaware of the monumental shift happening in that moment. And for the first time in years, Ben felt like they weren't just surviving, they were starting to thrive. The drive home that night felt surreal. Ben glanced at the envelope resting in the cup holder, its presence almost too much to process. He had already started thinking about how to use the money, catching up on rent, fixing the car's aging tires, and setting a little aside for emergencies. The possibilities felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders. In the back seat, Timmy was fast asleep, his head lolling against the window. Ben smiled softly as he turned onto their street, the familiar sight of their small rental house coming into view. It wasn't much, but tonight it felt different, like it was holding its breath, waiting for the possibilities the future might bring. Ben carried Timmy inside and tucked him into bed. the boy murmuring something about dinosaurs before settling back into sleep. In the quiet of the house, Ben sat at the kitchen table, spreading the bills from the envelope carefully. The sum wasn't just a lifeline, it was a real chance to get back on track. The next day, Ben and Timmy arrived at Mark's garage, the offer from the night before still fresh in Ben's mind. The shop was larger and busier than the small place Ben had worked at for years, with rows of cars on hydraulic lifts and state-of-the-art equipment gleaming under fluorescent lights. Mark greeted them with an easy smile, waving them over. "Morning, Ben. Ready to get started?" Ben nodded, his nerves jangling but his determination steady. "Yeah, I'm ready." Mark led him through the garage, showing him the layout and introducing him to the team. They were a mix of seasoned mechanics and younger apprentices, all of whom greeted Ben warmly. It felt strange to be welcomed so easily, but it was a good kind of strange. Timmy, meanwhile, had found his way to one of the mechanics, who was working on a bright red sports car. The boy's wide eyes sparkled as he pointed to the engine, asking rapid-fire questions. Mark chuckled. "Looks like your kid's a natural. We might have to hire him in a few years." Ben laughed, feeling a rare sense of pride swell in his chest. He'd love that. By the end of the first day, Ben had already settled into the rhythm of the shop. The work was familiar, but the resources and support here were leagues beyond what he was used to. It felt good, steady, promising. A week later, as Ben finished up a repair, Mark approached him with a clipboard. "How are you feeling about everything so far?" "Honestly," Ben said, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's been great. I wasn't sure I'd fit in, but this place, it feels like home already." "That's good to hear," Mark said, nodding. "Because we've been impressed with you. If you're up for it, I'd like to talk about a more permanent position. There's room to grow here, Ben, not just as a mechanic, but as part of the team." Ben blinked, caught off guard by the offer. "A permanent position? Already?" Mark smiled. "You've earned it. Hard work and good character, that's what we value here. And you've got both." The words hit Ben like a lifeline, and he nodded, his throat tight with gratitude. "I'd love that. Thank you." As the weeks turned into months, Ben found himself settling into a life he hadn't thought possible. The steady income allowed him to catch up on bills and finally give Timmy the kind of stability he deserved. They replaced the old tires on the car, stocked the pantry without stress, and even managed a few small luxuries like a trip to the zoo, where Timmy marveled at the dinosaur exhibits. One evening, after a particularly good day at the shop, Ben received a call from Amelia. "Hi, Ben," she said, her voice warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," Ben said, leaning against the counter as he watched Timmy color at the table. "I just wanted to check in," Amelia said, "and to see how everything's going." "It's going well," Ben said honestly. "Better than I could have imagined. Thank you again for everything." Amelia's voice softened. "You don't have to thank us, Ben. You've already proven how much you deserved the help. Mom's been talking about you and Timmy nonstop. She's always been generous, but you've reminded her why she loves helping people." Ben chuckled lightly. "That's kind of her. And of you too." "We're lucky," Ben, Amelia said. "Mark and I and Mom were in a position to help others. And honestly, it's people like you who make it worth it. Seeing you and Timmy doing so well, it means more than you know." Ben's voice thickened slightly as he replied, "It means a lot to us too. I don't think I can ever repay what you've done." "You don't need to," Amelia said simply. "Just keep being you. That's enough." After hanging up, Ben sat quietly for a moment, watching Timmy scribble vibrant dinosaurs onto the page. For the first time in years, life didn't feel like a battle, it felt like a promise. Months passed, and life for Ben and Timmy slowly transformed in ways that still felt surreal. The weight of constant financial strain had eased, replaced by a steady rhythm of work, family time, and small but meaningful victories. The house, once cold and worn, now felt warmer and more lived in. A fresh coat of paint, a new second-hand couch, and shelves stocked with books for Timmy gave it a sense of home that had been missing for years. One Saturday afternoon, Ben was working under the hood of his car in the driveway, his tools scattered across an old towel. Timmy was kneeling beside him, handing him wrenches and asking endless questions about how engines worked. "Why does the oil have to go here?" Timmy asked, pointing to the dipstick. "Because if it doesn't, the engine won't run smoothly," Ben explained, smiling as he wiped his hands on a rag. "Think of it like dinosaur bones. They need to stay in place to work properly, right?" Timmy's face lit up with understanding. "Oh, like a skeleton. That's so cool." Ben laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "Exactly, buddy." A car pulled up to the curb and Ben looked up to see Mark stepping out, holding a box in his hands. He waved, his broad smile as easygoing as ever. "Hey Ben," Mark called. "Got a minute?" Ben wiped his hands and stood, gesturing for Timmy to stay back from the tools. "Mark, what brings you here on a weekend?" Mark shrugged. "Amelia and I were cleaning out some things, and we thought you might like these." He handed the box to Ben, who peeked inside to find a collection of pristine tools, ratchets, screwdrivers, and even a few specialty items he'd only seen in catalogs. "Wow," Ben said, stunned. "Mark, this is too much." "Nah," Mark said with a dismissive wave. "You've earned it. Besides, it's better they get used than sit around collecting dust." Timmy peeked into the box, his eyes wide. "Whoa. Dad, look at all this stuff." Ben smiled, shaking his head. "Thank you, really." Mark leaned against the car, his expression turning serious but still kind. "I didn't just come by for this, though. I wanted to talk to you about something else." Ben tilted his head, curious. "What's on your mind?" Mark crossed his arms. "I'm opening another shop downtown. It's going to be a bigger operation, and I need someone I can trust to help manage it. You've been doing great at the shop, Ben. The team respects you and you've got a head for the work. I think you'd be a great fit for the job." Ben blinked, the offer catching him completely off guard. "Manage it? Mark, I don't know. That's a big step." "You can handle it," Mark said confidently. "And I'll be there to help every step of the way. Think about it, okay? No pressure, but I think you'd be great." Ben nodded slowly, his mind already spinning. "I'll think about it. Thanks, Mark." As Mark drove off, Timmy tugged at Ben's sleeve. "Dad, are you gonna do it? Be the boss." Ben smiled, kneeling down to meet his son's gaze. "We'll see, bud. It's a big decision. But what do you think?" "I think you'd be awesome," Timmy said without hesitation, throwing his arms around Ben's neck. Later that evening, as Timmy fell asleep clutching his favorite dinosaur toy, Ben sat at the kitchen table, thinking about how much had changed. Mark and Amelia's kindness had opened a door he hadn't even known existed, and every day since, he'd felt more certain of his ability to walk through it. A text from Amelia popped up on his phone. "Hey, just wanted to say Mom's been asking about you and Timmy. She says she misses her young gentleman. We'd love to have you both over for dinner soon. Let us know when you're free." Ben smiled, typing a quick reply, "We'd love that. Thank you." As he set the phone down, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. What had started as a simple act of kindness, a decision to help a lost woman in the rain, had turned into something he couldn't have imagined. Evelyn's family, wealthy as they were, hadn't just offered money or a job. They'd offered trust, support, and a sense of belonging that had been missing from his life for so long. And now, as Ben looked around his small but cozy home, he realized he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something not just for himself but for Timmy. And it all started with a choice to stop and help someone who needed it, without expecting anything in return. As the rain began to tap lightly on the windows again that night, Ben smiled. For the first time in a long while, the sound didn't feel heavy. It felt like a promise.